John Brzenk, the arm that time forgot. They say all great things must come to an end. Athletes age, dynasties crumble, and sooner or later, even the greatest must step aside for the next generation. That's the way it works. That's the rule. And then there's John Brzenk. John Brzenk does not do endings. He does not crumble, does not falter, does not age in the way that normal men do. He simply exists permanently, impossibly, at the top of the mountain, the most dominant arm wrestler who has ever lived. The sport's one true constant. For more than 40 years, Brzenk has been the standard. No, scratch that. He is the sport. If you've ever watched arm wrestling, read about it, argued over it, chances are you were talking about John Brzenk. If there were a Mount Rushmore of the sport, they might as well save themselves the trouble and just carve his face 4 times. This is a man whose reign as the world's strongest arm lasted so long that 3 different generations have tried and failed to dethrone him. The same way one does not simply defeat gravity or outlast the sun, arm wrestlers do not replace John Brzenk. They try, they fail, they go home with sore tendons in an existential crisis. But to truly understand the legend of Brzenk, to grasp the absurdity of his career, you have to go back to the early 80s, when a wiry teenager with Popeye forearms walked into the world of professional arm wrestling and promptly flipped the sport on its head. The birth of a legend. Most prodigies start out by showing promise. They give glimpses of their talent, moments of greatness, flashes of what could be. Brzenk, he walked into the professional ranks and just started winning, instantly, decisively, repeatedly. It was 1982. Ronald Reagan was in office. Michael Jordan was still in college, and somewhere in a dimly lit arm wrestling tournament, a 17-year-old kid with a name no one could pronounce was ragdolling grown men like they were part of a physics experiment gone wrong. He wasn't just winning, he was making it look easy. By 18, he was a world champion. Not a junior champion, not a most promising newcomer or a watch out for this guy type. A world champion. At an age when most teenagers were worried about prom dates and algebra tests, Brzenk was dismantling men twice his size. From that moment on, the sport of arm wrestling had a new sheriff, and he would rule with an iron grip. Hollywood and the myth of the arm wrestling machine. By the mid-80s, Brzenk was already something of a legend within arm wrestling circles. The problem was, the sport was still a niche pursuit, known mostly to barroom bruisers and the occasional county fair attendee. Then came Over the Top. Yes, the 1987 Sylvester Stallone film is mostly remembered as a campy, muscle-fueled fever dream about a truck-driving arm wrestler who turns his hat backward and transforms into a human wrecking ball. But behind all the Hollywood dramatics, the real star of that film wasn't Sly, it was Brzenk. See, Over the Top was loosely based on John Brzenk's actual life. Stallone's character, Lincoln Hawk, was an everyman who crushed the competition with pure grit and fatherly determination. But in reality, Brzenk wasn't an underdog. He was a runaway freight train. He didn't need motivation or backstory. He just needed an opponent. While the film introduced the masses to arm wrestling, Brzenk kept doing what he did best: winning. Over the Top may have made arm wrestling mainstream, but Brzenk made it matter. A career that defied time. The thing about dominance is that it usually has a shelf life. Athletes break down. Younger, stronger challengers emerge. Skills decline. And for years, people waited for Brzenk's expiration date. They waited through the 90s, when he kept winning. They waited through the 2000s, when he kept winning. They waited through the 2010s, when he slowed down, but yes, still kept winning. This is a man who has competed in over 500 professional matches. 500 victories that spanned 4 decades. A career so long that at some point, people just stopped asking when he'd retire and started asking if he was human. The truth is, Brzenk was never the biggest. He didn't have the longest arms or the widest shoulders. He was never the heaviest or the strongest on paper. What he had was something far more dangerous, a grip that felt like a hydraulic press, tendon strength that bordered on supernatural, and a mind that turned arm wrestling into chess. He understood the sport better than anyone who had ever lived. He knew angles, pressures, counters. He knew when to attack, when to hold, and when to let his opponent burn themselves out. And for 40 years, no one could figure him out. Still not finished. By the time Brzenk hit his late 50s, surely, this was the end, right? This is the point where the body says enough, where the joints give out, where the reflexes slow, where new generations take over. And yet, in 2021, at the age of 57, Brzenk came out of retirement, not to do commentary, not to coach, not to take a bow and wave to the crowd. No, Brzenk came back to win. And win he did. He took on world-class competition, guys 20, 30 years younger, guys who were supposed to be the future of the sport, and he beat them. In 2022, at 58 years old, he entered King of the Table, one of the most prestigious arm wrestling tournaments in the world. He was facing Khamzat Chimaev, the #1 ranked arm wrestler in the world, a man in his prime, a man with youth, speed, and power. It did not matter. Brzenk pinned him anyway. At an age when most men are contemplating retirement homes and knee replacements, John Brzenk was still proving that he was better than the best, the legacy of the greatest. So, what do you do with a man like John Brzenk? Do you call him the greatest arm wrestler of all time? That seems insufficient. Do you say he redefined the sport? That much is obvious. Do you talk about his dominance, his longevity, his impossible ability to keep going? You could, but then you'd be missing the point. The point is that John Brzenk never believed in limits. He never played by the rules of time, age, or probability. He was the anomaly, the exception, the man who was not supposed to keep winning, but did anyway. And as long as there's a table, an opponent, and a moment left to prove it, John Brzenk will still be there. Because some legends fade, others just tighten their grip.